Democracy literally means demos kratos, which is people power. So if all of us decide that we are going to be the ones who show up differently every single day, we will in turn change the political system that we're living within. And I've seen it happen before in my own eyes. That's how I know it's like really true. It only happens when we have the courage to step out of the comfortable. It only happens when we have the courage to demand for more and to really recognize our agency.
Hello, beautiful souls. It's been a tough week to be a human as we find ourselves in this position of watching a violent conflict and not just seeing it from the perspective of the dominant culture news headlines, but actually witnessing what is happening on the ground through social media. In the past weeks, I have seen so many horrific things that I can't unsee. From the violence that happened in Israel on October the 7th, to the thousands of deaths of children in Gaza, to the torture of men in the West Bank, to the beating of Christians and Orthodox Jews in Jerusalem. It's really a lot to witness. And of course, we have the luxury of then going to sleep, whereas those in Gaza can't. There are so many aspects of what is happening in Gaza that you can't fathom from the videos, such as the constant sound of crying and terror, the flies that are everywhere, the smell of the bodies, and the lack of anywhere clean to use the toilet. And through what is happening in Palestine, it has brought perhaps to your attention the silent Holocaust in the Congo, which isn't in the mainstream media, which is over the mineral coltan used in our tech devices, where 48 women are raped hourly, millions have been displaced, and over 6 million people have been killed, half of which are children. As well as the loss of human lives, both of the innocent civilians and the military, I wonder about the more than a human world, the plants, the animals, the land, the spirits. I had hoped by this time we as humans would be united for the future of our planet, banded together by what we know about climate breakdown. We have experienced that governments can come together and the impossible can happen, like it did during the pandemic. And I find it heartbreaking that the so-called superpowers are coming together for war, not to solve the crisis with the intelligent tools and ways of understanding humanity and nature that we have access to. I know it sounds naive to say that, to expect anything different than the power over and extractive paradigm. And yet I feel it's important we nurture our own humanity. The story that came on my feed that stood out for me the most this week was of a man who stood outside the White House with a single protest candle every night during the Vietnam War. A reporter came and asked him if he really believed his little protest would change anything. He said, "I don't come here to change them. I come here so they don't change me. I will not allow the steady, maddening onslaught of insanity to wear down my humanity. I will keep knowing the truth and telling the truth. I will do my small part every damn day to stay human, to stay awake and tender, so the world does not wear away my humanity." There is often talk of building the new future versus fighting the old system. And I feel it's important to do both. I am sharing in my Instagram stories direct actions you can take for the people of Palestine. These include buying SIM cards for journalists in Gaza, as well as signing petitions and writing to your politicians, making your voice known and contacting your member of parliament or representative. Do make some impact. Please keep using your power in this way and putting pressure on our leaders. I also believe in the power of prayer and spiritual practice and feel both political activism and sacred activism have their place. Somebody asked me last week, why pray for peace and justice when it's not enough? I feel that it's important that we align our spiritual power to the highest values. I've just been on a pilgrimage with my dear friend and teacher, Sienna Sherman, who you know from this podcast. and taking that time to strengthen my vessel, to explore my shadow, to move my body, to pray together, and be on sacred land with community allows me to deepen my compassion, my discernment, and my ability to show up for these times. The spiritual realms are vast, and the unimaginable can happen there. Stephanie Mines, who has been on this podcast, shared this week that she spent a night of horrific journeying through the bardos, a practice she learned from the Buddhist Vajrayana Rinpoches during the time when she founded the Tara approach for the resolution of shock and trauma. She was in service to the HIV positive community then, and everyone was dying. This was before the discovery of the protease inhibitors. She shared she would never have predicted that these practices would be brought forward in this, the time of massacres, in the names of the innocent children being sacrificed to human ignorance. The journeying through the bardos was interspersed by waves of vomiting. She had eaten nothing to cause the vomiting, and when she looked at what she had purged, it was ashes. I want to share with you a new initiative from Swati Martin, who you also know from this podcast, and her initiative Tunshe, of which I have spoken at events before. Following on from their World Peace Prayer, they are hosting weekly Sunday Peacemakers Circles, which are a sacred space for learning from peace-building experts and activists, some of the necessary and most effective tools to become active agents of peace in our families and communities. For those of you in Bali, you can join in person at Lineage, the space created by Malentz Bart Williams and Shiloh Sheev Suleiman that we shared earlier this season in an episode. And everyone else can join online. You can find the link of how to join the Peacemakers Circle in our show notes. My guest this week is Daze Aghaji. At just 23, she is a dynamic force of nature. Hailing from London, she is a climate justice activist whose advocacy for radical systemic change centers on youth political engagement, regenerative cultures, social justice, and intersectionality. The Guardian has described her as a ball of energy, conviction, and warmth. Her bold activism has led her to working with an array of leading NGOs, governments, institutions, and grassroots changemakers globally. She has been closely involved with the climate movement Extinction Rebellion since its formative days, later going on to becoming a founding member of the youth faction Extinction Rebellion Youth. Amazingly, Daze became the youngest candidate to stand in a European parliamentary election in 2019, running as a climate emergency independent to highlight the need to reimagine political systems and participation. Later, she successfully brought a judicial review against the UK government over gaps in policy to meet the previous carbon budgets, which forced the government to release the net zero strategy ahead of COP26. In 2022, her work was recognised by the Royal Society of Arts, Manufacturers and Commerce, as she became a selected honorary fellow of the Society. Formerly, Daze was the creative director and COO at Earthrise Studio, regenerative culture coordinator and strategist for Extinction Rebellion UK, and a contributor to Sky TV's environmental series. Currently, she is working as a multifaceted environmental creative consultant, communicator, facilitator, and artist. Daze is an artist in residence at Phytology, environmental creative at the Gate Theatre, director in Boundless Theatre, and trustee at philanthropic youth focus foundation, Blagareve Trust. In Daze's own words, the only way we can prevent environmental catastrophe is by going back to our roots and falling back in love with our land. In this episode, called Vacuums of Collapse, we explore the themes of climate activism, grief, and future democracies, as we speak to the question, how do we build future cultures rooted in care and regeneration? We hope that this episode gives you a fresh perspective on how we can meet the issues of our time. Welcome to All That We Are, with me, your host, Amisha Gadiali. On this show, we explore the weave between activism, the sacred, creativity, and regeneration, the spaces where our inner and outer worlds dance. From healing trauma to nature connection, to new technologies to ancient wisdom, it's time for us to move beyond silos and into an integrated way of being. Every one of us has ideas and personal experiences to share that can lead us to a more beautiful future. Despite the challenges we face as a global community or the pressures we meet in our daily lives, when we stop and dare to listen, to ask ourselves the big questions, and to share what we are already doing and envisioning, we create the futures of our wildest dreams. And we begin to embody all that we are becoming, and all that is possible. Daze, it is a delight to welcome you to All That We Are. Thank you for being here and coming to share more of your story and your perspective.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been a journey to get here, but we are. And yeah, that very much excites me.
What are the futures of your wildest dreams?
Now, in this particular moment in time of where we're seeing so much conflict and hurt across the world, it kind of rings even truer to me. It's a world of where we see peace and justice. It's a world of where we see the most unlikely together, holding hand in hand, teaching each other, sharing wisdoms. It's a world that is ecologically right, that is connected to understanding boundaries within ourselves, within our planets, within our communities. It's a world that holds love at the center of everything. I do actually think this world is totally possible, even though it's part of my wildest dreams. And that's, why I do everything I do, to hopefully get a bit closer to that world that we all deserve.
And how do you feel like we can get closer to that in a meaningful way?
So I talk a lot about the ideas of regenerative cultures and how the first step to anything is really recognizing ourselves and seeing ourselves in its fullest, beautiful and ugliest forms. And that's the beginning of everything. I find a lot of people are scared to do so. I was scared as well, because it's awful confronting the parts of yourself that you know you're adding and contributing to the world that we live in now, which feels so like disharmonious, that feels chaotic. So yeah, I think it's kind of going back to self is the first step that I think I take and everyone can take to really understanding how do we change our behaviors so we no longer keep contributing to what's been happening, and how do we change our behaviors to hold what we think the future should look like and enacting that on a daily basis.
I mean, I definitely feel that although it's important what we do on a daily basis, that it's not enough without a huge systemic and political change. You wrote that you feel that politics can be the biggest vehicle of love. I found it extraordinary reading that. You might not know, but I worked in Westminster in my early 20s.
Wow.
And I had quite an experience there, and it felt really refreshing to see you say that. And I would love to hear more about your vision there.
So yes, politics is based in love, and also it's democracy is sexy is also another thing that I love saying, because it's the sexiest form of really showing up for the world. And when I talk about the individuals like need to step up, I mean it in far more like serious way than recycling or, like growing your own veg. It's so much more than that, because we have to remember that society is made up from all of us. So all of us deciding to change together is what creates societal change. And in the same way with politics and democracy literally means democracies, which is people power. So if all of us decide that we are going to be the ones who show up differently every single day, we will in turn change the political system that we're living within. And I've seen it happen before my own eyes. And that's how I know it's like really true. But it only happens when we have the courage to step out of the comfortable. It only happens when we have the courage to demand for more and to really recognize our agency within this problem. And that's like the moment of where it's like, oh, that inner work, it connects to the way I have relationships with others, the way I have relationships in community, and in turn, the way I have relationships with earth and politics and my country and my ancestry and everything that lives.
Can you share where and how you've seen it happen in front of your own eyes?
Yeah, so in many different ways, to be honest. One, my mum, growing up, I grew up really poor, actually, in North London. And I saw her take a step to say, I will not allow the next generation to grow up in poverty. And she, from being, a migrant woman who didn't have an education or a traditional education at that, to starting a restaurant and building a world that was beyond my own imagination, beyond her own wildest dreams, that has allowed me to go and do all the crazy stuff I do, was like the first step. And then the second, I guess, I would say it was around when I got my first job. I worked at Amnesty International, and I saw the power of a single letter and how if we all wrote letters together, we could literally save people from torture. I heard from people who were in prison, who were tortured, and them saying, by Amnesty and us collectively writing letters together, they knew they were being watched and they stopped. And to hear that from the person who was experiencing this, it just shows like the power. And I guess like that was the times that I'd watched it, and the time that I was involved in it was when I was 19, and I joined Extinction Rebellion really early on, and I helped plan the first rebellion with XR Youth, which is the youth branch of Extinction Rebellion. And for that 2 weeks, I think that 2 weeks really just changed my life. It really did, because it was when I saw what me practicing my own agency looked like, and how it could literally not just change the mind of a nation around how we think about the environmental crisis, what does community look like, etc., but physically change the space around us as well. Seeing from, Oxford Circus being a place of consumeristic hell and pollution, and then seeing just like a few days of people going, not on my streets, not on my watch, and then seeing it becoming a place of community, a place that everyone felt that they could be, a place that was demanding for so much more, demanding for life. And when you've done something like that, I guess that agency never really leaves you, the feeling and the acknowledgement that we have it. Because the difference, I think, between before then and after then is I didn't think I was the person who had that agency. I thought that was left to the politicians. I thought it was left to all the people who knew what they were doing, the experts. But when you kind of practice it, you realize, oh, actually, I can be an expert in my own lived experience of knowing that no one should live like the way that I lived, and to know that I can do something about it every single day. And that's, we can do it on different scales as well. It's not just, recycling and all of those. Those are like the smaller scale stuff. But the bigger scale is, okay, am I voting? Am I showing up to vote when I think all the candidates aren't very good? Am I even running and deciding to put myself in that position to give people an alternative choice? Those are actions that we can all take, and it's our constitutional rights to do so. So why don't we? It's because we don't know, or we don't feel like we can. We need that permission to be granted. And I hope that I grant everyone that permission to go, yes, you have permission to be loud, to fight for what you believe in, to show up in the most rawest forms of yourself, but then also to demand for better as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You might not know, but all that we are used to be called The Future is Beautiful. And before that, it was called Think, Act, Vote. And I launched it in the election year of 2010. That actually, if we can't trust our politician and our vote to be creating the future that we choose, the future of our wildest dreams, then we all have to be connected to that vision, and we all have to connect to our worthiness and our ability to be creating that, and to recognize that it is us that creates the future through how we spend our time, our energy, our money, from who we are in the world. And I still believe that. And I've also noticed over many years of asking this question that people find it hard to answer, that it is hard to claim that level of power and agency.
And also responsibility, which is, I guess, the one that feels the most like, oh my God, Because if you claim the power that you actually have the power to change things, when you don't change things, you feel the responsibility for what's going on. So yeah, I think there's that where it's like, it's quite scary to go, I am actually, the beholder of the world that I live in, and I can change that. But then also like larger scale of, I'm not just one person in many, I am one person in many, and seeing that as like a way to really hold power in our voices. And that's difficult for a lot of people. And I think it's because the world has made it difficult. And I think, like our education systems, the world that we live in every single day, and especially like I was thinking about this earlier, because I'm only 23 and I came to adulthood, which I will call 20, in the pandemic. And I've only really felt it over the last 2 years, which have been the most brutal years of my life. And I think this is how the world kills people's spirits and souls. It's by making it so difficult just to live that, you just feel like, how I can't control my own life. So how dare I think I'm the person to influence policy or whatever. So yeah, I definitely see it at works in my own. And I'm just kind of, now that I'm conscious to it, I'm like, how do I continue to foster that agency every single day, even when it feels really difficult, even when I feel like, I can't make my bed in the morning, so who am I to go and try and write government policy, but then it's like, democracy doesn't work if we don't all participate actively in citizenship.
I imagine that a lot of our Westminster politicians don't make their beds in the morning.
To be honest, yeah. And I'm sure they're not feeling bad about doing it either. And that's the funniest thing, isn't it?
Yeah. What gave you the courage to stand to be an MEP at 19?
In 2019, it was just like the most revolutionary year for me. So first, a few months before that was the rebellion, of where like I literally just like watched the world change before my eyes. I saw something that I thought was impossible when I was first told that we're going to have a rebellion by Roger Hallam. And I thought, God, this guy's just crazy, but I've got time and I'm young, so why not put into it, if it could even work. And then to see it actually work, and not just work, but work so much better than we'd ever imagined. I kind of just was like, I can't allow this to end. I saw so many people recognizing their agency and recognizing their power to change things, and then kind of seeing us dwindle back into the everyday as usual, the status quo. And at that time, I was asked whether I would do it. And in another weird way, I thought, oh, I would so do it if I got the opportunity to, but that won't happen anyway. So I said yes. And then Roger said if he could get the money that I needed to run within the next 24 hours, would I seriously do it? And I said, yeah, thinking he wouldn't get the money. And then he did. And then I kind of was left with that dilemma of, God, now I actually kind of have to do something. So yes, I wouldn't say it was just sheer courage, but I would also say that, there is something about community and feeling supported that has really allowed me to kind of go on this journey of knowing that I had the support of not just my friends and my family, but the movement, the people who I worked with, the people who saw what was happening and couldn't stand it continuing, and that's why I kind of loved running, because it wasn't really about winning. It wasn't about winning at all, because I knew statistically that was pretty impossible. And if that had happened, I don't know what I would have done. But it was about opening everyone up to the idea that this could be a version of politics. And if we like it, we should put our best efforts into making it happen.
And how was that as an experience for you?
Oh, very interesting. So the election kind of focused on like two parts. One was community efforts, and that was like hosting conversation circles around gentrification, around the issues that are plaguing Londoners right now, about, the beginnings of now what we know as the cost of living crisis, the aftermath of all of the political upheaval that we'd seen in the last year before. But then the other half was this quite, agency for direct action, which is, I'm choosing to use my body to serve my community. Yeah, it's the most beautiful form of sacrifice. And having both of those things playing out with each other made me experience this election in a community of where I knew that I wasn't just myself. I was, being the representative of so many people who had met along the way in that journey of that campaign. And even though, I might have not won the slot, I could go to the hustings and bring up the conversations that I'd been having. I could be the person to represent that. So it was really empowering, but then also quite disempowering in the same time. And now that I know that you worked in Westminster, I know that you probably know why, because it just showed that this political system that we're using is just not fit for purpose. It just isn't. And it was soul crushing to kind of see it from the inside and to know that, some people ask me, are you going to run? Do you want to be politicians? I'm like, no, because I've seen what it looks like. And it looks like, a rotting apple that's pretending everything's fine. But we know it's not fine and we know it's not right. Seeing the levels of corruption, seeing how, you have to have money to run, so how many different voices, different representational backgrounds are being missed out in the conversation just because of the levels of barrier to entry.
And personality type.
Yes, personality type, because I, believe you me, before 2019, I was more traditionally an introvert. I still see myself as quite introverted, but I perform extroverted sometimes. But it really does. You have to have a certain personality type and also a certain level of a grit. If I'm honest, long term, I don't think I would have had, because I feel the pain of the world really deeply. And if you're in politics, you can't feel into that or numb you.
Yeah, I used to get teased a lot from feeling and caring too much about people, which was interesting.
Yeah, which is crazy. Because it's if not for people, what are we doing this for,
Exactly. Well, power, of course. But my absolute soul-crushing moment was when I was a spokesperson for the referendum to change our voting system, the Yes campaign. And I saw the lengths that were being gone to in order to make sure that didn't go through. It broke something inside of me, and I had to step away at that point. And I feel so inspired when I meet someone like you that's stepped in, and I'm also really inspired by the friends that I have, where we all started out in our early 20s doing a lot of political campaigning and political activism together, and many of them are MPs or they're high up within policy making, and I really admire them for having that grit, but they are definitely quite a different kind of personality and energy to me.
Exactly. And I do applaud it. But then also I hope for a world and a democracy that can hold the tenderness of what it is to be, an empathic person. I always say empathy is just so missing in politics most of the time. A lot of policies would not go past even just ideation if it really was truly empathetic, and this is where I think when we're dreaming about our wildest dreams, we should be thinking about what does it look like when politics can hold these feelings? What does it look like when politics not just tries to, but does? That's when we start seeing love and care being the roots of everything. That's when we start seeing our policies being different because it's holding that at the core. And that's the only way that we can continue in this world, is by doing that.
Yeah, I would go back to Westminster if there was a council of all beings and I could be there as an intuitive to bring forth voices from the more than human world. But I don't see that happening just yet, but it absolutely is part of the futures of my wildest dreams.
I do, if I'm honest with you.
Yay!
Yes, I'm a true believer in, they can continue to muscle, and we're watching it, we are watching this political system fall apart where no one knows who to vote for because they're all just not who we need right now. And I'm when do we start bringing in these kind of more intuitive practices? And it's not like they have been unseen in politics either. The earliest forms of our politics were, people, tribal groups around fires talking about the next generations to come, the both the living and the non-living yet. It's we've had these kind of things playing in decision making before. So I'm all hoping for one day for Rishi Sunak to pretend he's a mouse, and maybe he could feel what it means to be small in the world, and then have empathy, not just for humans, but then for all life as well. And I think, that's the only way that, we're going to get out of this mess. And people like us have to kind of be there to step in as well when this system does collapse, because it will. And that's one thing that running for election kind of taught me. It was this recognition that the collapse is a lot sooner than I think most people want to think, or even think is possible.
Amazing. Well, I'm inspired by your energy around this.
Oh, thank you. I'm inspired by everything that you do, and I think there is something that links people. Like, I think a lot of people who work in politics do end up in this well-being space because they care. And that's like the first bit of politics. No, either you go in for power or you go in because you really deeply care about what's going on in the world.
You found out about the climate crisis when you were like a fairly young teenager. How did that feel? And I'm curious as to what that experience is.
So I found out when I was around 16, and I found out because I was ill already from air pollution. And I found out about air pollution by accident, because I started having breathing issues and my doctors weren't really giving me anything that made sense. So I went looking and I found out about air pollution. I found out about an incinerator that was burning trash every single hour, every single day, out like literally a mile away from my mum's house that I was living at. And it was harrowing. And at this point, I'd already fallen in love with politics. So it was kind of like, we were told that our governments are there to protect us and keep us safe. And that's the whole reason why we enter into this, social contract with them. And then to find out that was not the case was really soul crushing. And then to find out that it wasn't just an issue of air pollution, but it was just something so much bigger. It was, the destruction of nature, and for me, I had a very interesting relationship with nature before this point, because when I grew up in poverty, but I also grew up with a domestically violent dad. When my mum got enough money to be able to leave and also to send us to boarding school, nature was where I found safety. So finding out that nature was under attack, and not even by anything natural or normal, but by ourselves, the same people who she holds, was just, it's harrowing. That's the only way I can describe it. So I went through like a long phase of what I didn't know at the time was really, it was anger, and then it was grief. It's really deep grief. And even now, I think my eyes are tearing up because I still feel it. It's still, it makes me I just don't know how we've gotten here, and it made me kind of go into myself. I was trying to find ways that I can control it. First, it was to ignore that it existed and to try and carry on. Then second, it was to try and micromanage my life. So I've done that whole individual change thing on the smaller scale of where you're zero wasting and you're not eating meat and you're not flying and all of these things, which, are great, but in like, it's nothing but trying to micromanage a problem that feels too big for us. And then, in university, this is kind of how I got into Extinction Rebellion. I was really depressed because I'd kind of gone angry. I tried to grieve it. I didn't know how to grieve it because society doesn't give you the tools to grieve, even for humans, let alone something that wasn't human. I couldn't really talk to my mum about it because she didn't really get it in the same way that I got it. So I accidentally found myself in an Extinction Rebellion meeting. And for the first time, it was people who, they got it. I didn't have to explain it. They just saw it and they knew that I was grieving for something far greater than myself. And and I felt so held and cared for and loved by absolute strangers. And that kind of feeling is just, it's like returning home, but not even knowing that that place was your home. And it just changed everything for me. And I think that's where I was able to kind of fight through all of the social conditioning I've had my whole life of feeling like I don't have any power whatsoever. It was because I was not even given it, but my power was recognized and it was nurtured and it was held up and it was cared for. So it was really difficult. And every now and then as well, I go through grief cycles of grieving something new about the environmental crisis. The last one was quite dark, but it was grieving the fact that, for most of my late teens and early 20s, I was fighting to keep the world as it existed. I was fighting to mitigate against the climate crisis. Last year, I recognized that a lot of harm is already done and that can't be undone. The world is not going to be anything like the world we're living in today. And we are going to have to find a way to hold the collapse of society as it happens. And we're going to have to try and find solution there. And I don't think we're going to be able to stop it because we're on an avalanche at the moment. And I think, that was last year, and this moment we're talking about, we're at a place of where we're literally watching just horrors occur in front of our eyes. And we know in this moment, it's just, what can we do about it apart from try to practice our agency in the best way, but also recognizing that this collapse might have to come for people to know how serious what we're talking about is and what we're trying to solve and fight against is. And it's kind of sad that we have to let so many lives and non-human, more than human, and human go for the world to truly recognize where we are right now. And that's been my latest grief. And I think it will continue through my life. But I'm trying to find the beauty in this collapse. And what can I do to make what happens when it collapses? It creates space for rebuilding. And in that rebuild, what are we going to hold really dear? And how are we going to practice our agency in that rebuilding while trying to soften the collapse for many people who are going to suffer through it? So not the happiest note, I'm sorry. But it's the honest one.
We're not afraid of a bit of grief here. It was incredibly moving hearing you share about finding Extinction Rebellion and finding that community, as it sounds like perhaps your friends when you were a teenager didn't share this same perspective on the world.
I wish they did, but they didn't.
And that then when you found Extinction Rebellion, that actually it brought so many of you together that had been grieving in isolation or feeling powerless in isolation.
Yeah, my friends all kind of thought I was just a bit weird. And because I was a little weird, very hypersensitive. I have learning disabilities, so it does just show up in that way as well. But especially my relationship, especially with trees. I've always loved trees. And I would sit with trees a lot, and I'd rather pick the company of nature over most people. My friends, they loved me, but they also didn't get that part of me. But then also they really didn't get the climate crisis, because that was a time before we even called it a crisis, where it might have been global warming that was happening. And they were still in that kind of things of where they were so focused on partying and kind of, going to Magaluf and doing the girls' holidays while I was kind of going through this massive grief journey. And it was just the energies were just very incompatible. So they didn't get it. But I think now they get it a bit more. I don't think that they're totally there to face the true reality of what we found ourselves in. But I guess in time.
And what have you learnt about living with this level of grief, climate anxiety, and this beautiful optimism that you also have for what's possible? And how do you kind of weave between those, and what can you share for others that might be struggling?
It's the yin and yang, it's the love and rage, it's, we have to hold all of it. And I've realized that I've had the deepest and darkest depressions, but then I also recognize that I've had the most amazing experiences ever that have made me to kind of have this optimism. So I do recognize I kind of have to hold both of them. And yeah, there's a lot of stuff like Keats talks a lot about that in his letters to Fanny, of where he talks about this kind of like, in order to feel like the highest forms of love, you also have to feel like the deepest forms of sadness. So I kind of, yeah, through like just loving poetry and learning about romantics, I knew that was something that you kind of have to be with. There's also a pragmatic version. That's the recognition that I'm still really young in my life. And if I wasn't optimistic, I wouldn't be able to wake up every day if I didn't have the optimism. And also, like, I've been around people who've made wildest dreams happen. I've been around big dreamers. My mum's a big dreamer. Yeah. And I've seen it happen. So I know it's possible, you know, and this is where like the personal agency really does play a really big part in this. It's how do you make everyone feel like they have that agency? Because we all should have climate anxiety, because this is the moment to be anxious, if any. But within the anxiety, we also need to have agency, or we go into apathy. So it's like, how do we continue to practice this agency? And every day that looks slightly different. You know, some days I can, you know, my agency is to avoid plastic at the supermarket because that's the most I can do. And that's okay. And then some days my agency is, you know, shouting at governments or planning some mischief, you know, and it's a lot bigger and it can hold that as well. So yeah, it's about having this like real deep love for everything, and also like being that romantic that can kind of hold all of these feelings.
Beautiful. You're carrying so much wisdom.
Thank you. I'm trying to get better at compliment receiving as well, because that's also another thing we're not taught how to do.
I mean, I imagine now that you do spend a huge amount of your time with people that are actively working in this space and with a full understanding of where we are. How do you feel that people your age are, like in general, like kind of outside of your immediate circles, aware of what's happening and interested in it?
So for all my life, I've never really fit into one category. I grew up poor, but I also grew up quite middle class because I obviously went to boarding school. So I've kind of had that. I've grown up being, you know, Black in an urban city, but also being Black in the countryside. So I've collected like this really weird hodgepodge group of friends that never quite mix at my birthday party. But in this, I actually find that a lot of my friends sit very much outside of truly getting it, which, you know, is strange. We all get it to like varying spectrums. But I still hang out with a lot of friends who think I am still a little crazy, who do think that the world will be fine and it will exist as it always has existed, they say. So yeah, so I am kind of like brought back down to earth very, very often. So I am quite lucky that I don't live in like such an echo chamber. I think there's a lot of young people now who we're just focused on like living and getting through our 20s in the wake of everything. I feel like a lot of people don't recognize, they always see Gen Zs as like, you know, the ones who have agencies, the ones who are angry, also the ones who are slightly lazy. I call it boundaried. They see us in all these different ways, but they don't see us we are the generation who have had to grown up in like probably the most like messed up times of the last like 100 years. Whether it's economic crisis, and, you know, me and my friends, we've all had conversations at the dinner party where we truly opened up about how 2008 totally changed our families forever. We've had to grow up in time of political unrest in many different ways. We've had to grow up in time of social unrest, economic unrest. Everything has felt chaotic in our whole lives. We have not lived in a stable climate our whole lives. Being 23, I have not experienced what it is to live in a stable climate. Like, this is the reality, you know? So I think a lot of us are just kind of focusing on how do we just make it through the next like few months, if not years, because times are quite bleak. But then also there is this, like, you know, I talked about that kind of like without the agency, you have the apathy. And I think that's why you're seeing a lot of rising up. You're seeing a lot of youth movements. It's because it's like, we don't have a choice but to have to be optimistic. And to hold that optimism, we have to do something to make that happen. Because, yeah, if not, then, what's the whole point of this? What's the whole point of living through this struggle if we, at one point, we can't say, okay, another generation will never have to face this again, will never have to face such level of chaos in their upbringing. And I also think a lot of people are like, if it's not the Delulu, it's the Salulu, which is like what people are saying on TikTok, of where it's like a lot of people are just living in trying to regain what it means to be young again and experience childhood again, so we can give ourselves one that feels right, even though we are now in adulthood. So there is also that level of where it's so hard to face that a lot of people are choosing delusion, but I get it.
Choosing delusion because it's kind of too much.
Yeah, it's too much. It's a lot. It's a lot. And we're told everything is fine and everything should be fine, but we all know that collectively we know something isn't fine. So we are all kind of living in that. And I think, I like on TikTok, there's lots of stuff around girlhood and this whole idea of like reclaiming our girls and going to buy ourselves Barbies at the age of 25 and buying ourselves pink everythings. It's like us trying to like go back and go, okay, we weren't able to experience this level of childhood, because of all the problems that were occurring in our lives. And how do we kind of go into that delusional state and go back and find it?
And is that helpful to, like, I've never been on TikTok, so you're just like sharing with me a whole world that I don't know about. And I can imagine that a lot of the listeners that we have here might not also know too much about TikTok. I have a friend that sends me really good political TikToks.
Yes, there are some really good political TikTok pages.
But I don't really know. So yeah, I'm curious, like, do you find that to be helpful, like this sort of notion of girlhood and wanting to re-explore that innocence?
Yeah, I think it is helpful because it's like this, we all find our coping mechanisms, right? And I think this is probably healthier than drinking, So yeah, I do think there is, but it's about how much do we absorb and like kind of sit in that like slightly deluded state, and then how much do we actually have to get in, and there is a balance. Like I always say, like, there are months that I don't read the news. And it's because I already know enough to know that things need to be done. And I don't need to know so much of where it becomes paralyzing, So it's kind of like, how do we hold that? And, if going back into what it means to be a girl, like I live on a boat. So I've chosen this like slightly strange lifestyle because I know that this would make me happy, and I'm trying to figure out what ways of I can having, the realities of the world and trying to fight through them and being educated and informed, but then also finding rest within that as well. And I think that's what most people are trying to do, is kind of, like holding both of those in the same ways.
Beautiful. I wish we were on your boat in person right now. What do you receive from living on the boat that allows you to do that and to kind of be more present and to hold these different extremes?
Yes, boat life has literally saved me. One, because I'm a London girl and I've lived in London most of my life, but also I don't like London because it's just always much. It's really intense energy. But then also I've lived in the countryside and I get bored really easily and I kind of get a bit antsy. So it's quite a nice middle ground of where I can be surrounded by nature and, I wake up every morning to bird song, and that's something that, allows me to kind of like feel rested. The canal systems tend to be away from main roads or like underneath. So we're living in like almost a slightly different plane to the rest of London. We're hidden away where we actually have to be good fellows with our natural wildlife, whether it's, the products that we decide to use in our home. You have to think about it because you see the effects, the direct effects of everything that you do, on the waterways. But then also there's just like this really amazing community that really holds itself. It's just magical, where we say hi to each other, where we know our neighbours better, even though we only spend around 2 weeks with most neighbours, you know them better than the neighbours that you've lived in houses, apartments with for years. You know, it's just stuff like that just kind of, it makes everything feel like it just could be a little easier. And if we all kind of lived with this mindfulness of whether it's like how much we use and consume and how much we can be closer to nature and all of these kind of things, like the world would be really different, you know. So that's why boat life just feels like it's like heaven, but then also like close enough for me to like still feel really in touch with the craziness it is to be a Londoner, but then also don't feel like I'm being swallowed by it, which I think a lot of people, especially people not from London, always feel like they're kind of being swallowed by London when they've spent too much time here.
Thank you for tuning in. If you are enjoying this episode, do join our membership. For a small contribution, you can be part of our community, where we deepen the conversation and offer spaces of learning and embodiment. As a member, you are a patron supporting the making of this show, keeping the episodes full length, free and accessible for all. And you receive a number of benefits, such as monthly soul space, going deeper sessions, access to our library of workshops, and discounts on all our online and in-person experiences. Our membership is what makes us able to make this show and stay advertising free in a world that is always trying to sell us stuff we don't need. Head to allthatweare.org/membership to find out more and join today. I'm curious what you feel is like your place within this collapse and this time of systemic change, and how you feel you can make a contribution that feels meaningful whilst you're also, as you said, like, you know, also just trying to get through your 20s.
This is why I just kind of fell in love with the notion of like regenerative cultures work, because it's the one work I think that can live through whatever happens, whether we end up in a climate just future with just transitions, etc., or whether we end up in a space of it being too late and having to manage with what we have, but then also still live in community with one another and make sure like we don't eat each other in societal collapse. So just to talk about regenerative cultures for a bit, it's this, how do we build ways of living that aren't just sustaining life, but are regenerating life? And that is adding like a level of flourishment that is beyond our wildest dreams. And that's the way I see it. And yeah, one part is self-care. It's how do we take care of ourselves, both physically, mentally, spiritually, but then also doing the inner work of how do we show up in community? How are we adding to toxic systems that we don't believe in? And how do we re-socialize ourselves into being part of systems that are more true and aligned in the future that we want to see? How do we build community with not just ourselves, but with individuals, with larger groups of people? And that's usually kind of talked about as interpersonal care and community care. And then the fourth is action care. That's what activists usually call it. But action care basically boils down into how do we show up when times are really hard and it's just easier not to? And that's the thing we have to always ask ourselves, especially in times like this, is when things are feeling overwhelming and it just feels like it's too much and it is easier just to pretend that we don't know what's going on. How do we go, okay, we can hold that truth, but then also we can hold this agency as well. And then finally, the whole idea is if we learn those tenets of how to treat ourselves, hopefully that would go beyond not just ourselves, but the more than human. You know, we'll recognize that just because we may not understand doesn't mean that it should hold any less importance in our understanding of the world. Yeah, it's quite magical because it makes us just like really recognize that like even if everything goes bad, we are going to have to find ways to support each other through hard times. So yeah, and that's kind of where I felt like I was most called to. I've always been the person who people would come to when they're having personal strife or arguments or conflicts. So I felt like it quite naturally kind of fell to know that I am meant to be one of the space holders and facilitators for whatever's to come. And there needs to be more of us who have these skills, not just in space holding facilitation, but in foraging, in growing, in knowing how to make political systems work, because these are all the things that we're going to need, whether we build utopia or we just salvage what's left. These are useful tools. And I think that's kind of where I am kind of sitting in it. I see most of my work as one half is to mitigate and soften collapse. So try to make the world not collapse, ideally, but if it's happening, to try to make things less awful for people and planet. And then the second half is, how do we start building these futures? So when there is moments of collapse and there's moments of air and the vacuum that usually you see at the end of political revolutions or whatever, the vacuum can be filled by people who have the answers for regenerative futures. But all of my work has to kind of fit into these two categories, or I don't think I would be the person to be able to do it.
And what does that entail in a more practical sense?
So when we talk about mitigating and softening, so I have a consultancy practice. That's a weird one because I work a lot with corporates mostly, which is, a lot of activists. When I first told them that I was going to start working with these corporates, they were quite angry, actually, because they are the problem. These people have done this to the earth and we're fighting against them. But what I realized is that a lot of them actually have people in them who are more similar to us than we know. And they are confused about what to do in these next steps. So taking them along that journey of learning how to care and love is part of the work that we need to do for them to really get what's going on. So I take them through that. So they may think they're just coming for a traditional climate risk strategy meeting, but they're actually coming to learn how to love nature, how to be with nature, how to recognize all forms of nature, how to recognize ourselves in nature, and then how to recognize their agency in protecting her. And that's kind of I guess, that's softening. So if, a company that's really big tries to, be less shit, it's going to make even, them not doing it very well will make the world a lot better place for a lot of more people. So that would be an ideal moment of mitigation of where, they may not be part of the future, but they're holding a lot right now. And how do we make that a bit easier for the people who are working with them, who are being affected by them? And then the regenerative futures work is kind of for example, I've been doing these practical activism workshops of where I teach people how to make policy and how to enact policy as well, and what those steps look like. And that's because I think young people should be policymakers. I think old people should be policymakers. I think Black and brown people and white people, and I think everyone needs to be policymakers. And I think we need to know, how do we kind of work these systems, but then also how do we change these systems to fit us as well, and to kind of recognize the representation that we have in our societies. So that would be a good example of one thing that I do, that it's yes, we're building regenerative futures by having 13-year-olds who know how to write policy. So when a politician tells them that they can't get that done, they know that's not true. And they know that they can say that's not true.
Amazing.
And they know that they can just enact it and do it themselves. Yes, exactly. And these are the regenerative futures that I hope of, where everyone feels like they've got something to add into the collective pie that we're making together.
And have you seen any policy changes from the work that you've been doing and the people that you've been supporting with that empowerment?
Yes, yeah. So one was it started in 2020, and we actually brought the case, I think, 2021. But I recognised that the UK Parliament had not fulfilled any of its carbon budgets for the last how many years. And I was quite horrified by this. And then to recognise also that the UK didn't have a net zero strategy. So I started legal proceedings to take the government to court over the fact that they didn't have a net zero strategy. And in order for them not to go through court, they decided just to make one, since it was the most sense thing to do.
The cheapest
that
thing
would
to
be an
do.
example. Exactly. Rather than fighting me and then having to do it themselves anyway, they just decide that, okay, instead of us going into court and doing this, why don't we just decide to write a net zero strategy? So that would be an example of my own like policy, like influencing work.
And were you pleased with the policy that came through?
No, I was not pleased with the net zero strategy. And this is why we helped collaborate in bringing another suit, which sued them for having a very bad net zero policy as well. So, there's also a level of persistence as well, that makes for activism. So yeah, that was one example. And another would be, I lobbied the Royal College of Psychiatry to recognise eco-anxiety, but then also recognise it as not something that should be just medically treated with medicine, but something that needs to be gone through. And I helped them create loads of resources for young people around how do we kind of hold the fact that we are feeling anxious about our world and how this doesn't make you mad, which was, a really powerful piece of work that has affected hundreds of thousands of people across the UK in actually finally being truly seen when they talk about their anxiety and recognizing it's not the same anxiety as just feeling anxious on a daily basis. It's far greater, and should be handled with such great care as well.
That's amazing and such important work.
Thank you.
Because as we know, the mental health world tends to view it as an individual's problem, something that's wrong with someone, rather than understanding that the way in which our culture is set up is not designed to create optimum mental health or even anything vaguely resembling healthy mental health.
Yes, exactly.
That's really amazing, Daze. Well done.
Thank you. Yeah. And I think it was just because like I had gone through so many years of feeling like I'm the crazy one for going, this isn't right, and I think a lot of young people kind of woke up in this world of where they're like just seeing all of this stuff. And then they're told that they are the ones that are feeling it. And we should just all, like nothing wrong with taking medicine. I think it's great for when it's needed. But some people just need to be told that they have the power to change things and that they can step up into that agency. And this has to be something that we talk through, not just medicate. The medication has to be supplementary if it's used, And yeah, I remember when I was quite lucky to get a psychiatrist in university. I told her about the grief that I was experiencing. And she said, if the environment is too hard of a topic, you should just stop doing work around it. And then therefore your anxiety will just go. And that was what people were faced with, and working with young people, because before that we did research to show how prevalent it is in young people, the youngest being a 6-year-old. I recognized that I thought my experience was just, I probably just had a really bad therapist. But the reality is there was a lot of young people who'd been told that, why don't you just like focus on school? Instead of focusing on the fact that the world might be ending and school might be totally irrelevant in like the next 10 years, and it's like this kind of like, this like real lack of recognizing what was happening. And it just felt like a real injustice to the people who are meant to be the future change makers, who are meant to, hold this beautiful regenerative future. And if we don't hear them in their grief today, they will hold the scars and traumas in tomorrow, and we need to recognize that.
And this is the time for actually really bringing the importance of our emotional selves into everything that we do, because that has been shut down for so long. And we're here in England, land of the stiff upper lip. Don't talk about the horrors that have happened, the pain that has been created, the lands that have been stolen, the people that have been enslaved, the things that people had to go and do in order to make that happen. Just keep it all locked in and, have a cup of tea that comes from India, a British cup of tea that comes from India.
Yes, exactly. You see what I mean? It's like we can no longer live in such, like we just can't. And I think this is where like environmental crisis is like waking us up to the fact that we do have to face some things at some point. I always say it's like the environmental crisis is almost like a mother's love. It's tending to us and still caring for us and loving us even when we do wrong, but then also giving us a good smack across the head, which is showing up as the climate crisis to say enough's enough. And this is like the tough love that we're facing.
And a mother's love is also about being able to hold steady in that love, even when it's really hard. And in that grief and in that pain and in that disappointment, and to really be able to anchor into that steadiness of love. That is what we're going to need more and more in these times. People that can hold that have enough courage and strength and hearts that have broken open so wide that they can hold others and hold, what's happening. We need these midwives, doulas of this shift. Yeah, clearly you are one of them.
No, I hope to be. I really hope to be a person who can help hold through this momentous moment that we're facing collectively as humans.
And I feel like so much of that is about being able to turn towards rather than turn away from things that are challenging, and developing that resilience and community to be with things that are uncomfortable and to be with things that are uncertain. I had an experience, my mum's not very well, and I was talking to a GP about her. He basically was just telling me that I should probably put her in a nursing home because it's going to get too hard for me. And what I felt in that interaction was that it was too hard for him.
Yes.
If he was in that situation. And I was like, no, that wasn't my question. My questions were around, what tweaks can we make that can give my mum more support in this situation? And I'm prepared for the fact that it's not going to be easy and that it isn't easy. Just like when you have a child, it's not an easy process. And you're not able to just say, okay, like, I'd like to outsource this bit because, I don't want to do it. That's not how it works.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it is possible and people do, but that's not what's going to allow us to hold these times. And so developing that ability to hold steady and to support each other and to not judge each other and to be able to hold space for others when they are struggling. And, as you said, it is true that it's like how far into the darkness you can go is how far into the beauty you can go. And being able to do that is such an important skill of these times. But it does mean that you are going to be in the darkness through some of these cycles, and to have people around that will hold you through those times and that will reflect to you that you're actually doing something important for the healing of this world is so important.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so sorry to hear about your mother as well. It's always difficult, isn't it? And I think nursing homes are like, I guess, another symptom of the problem. It's, we don't know how to deal with that. We don't, especially I've been doing a lot of thinking about what does it mean to live in a society that is so afraid of death? And I think, nursing homes is a prime example of us being afraid of death, but then also us continuing to force ourselves through the world that we're living in now and not really trying to change anything or trying to fix things, these small things. And, it's because we're scared of going, this world does need to collapse in some form. We are scared of saying this culture does need to die. And it's, I know it's difficult. But then also, in death, there is reincarnation, there is beauty. I always think, when people are a bit too scared to talk about death, I'm like, just talk about composting, It's like we are composting the system in order to have fertile soil for the next, And we don't shove our nose or try to ignore that that's the cycle of life when it comes to our compost heaps. So how do we think ourselves or our society is any different?
Absolutely. And there is so much beauty in death and so much wisdom. And the liminal space that you find yourself in when somebody's dying or when someone close has died, yeah, something really happens. And if we're not always busy trying to just sort of feel normal, like all the time, whatever that even means,
Yeah.
I think it just means
Yeah.
productive in capitalism.
Yeah,
Then,
literally.
yeah, and we meet these depths of ourselves. And it is in these spaces that we receive so much wisdom in that grief that allows us to see the next bit of vision of what's possible.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And there's also like something about like when we speak about death and holding death. So my granddad is actually buried in the living room at my grandma's house in Nigeria. And this is actually quite a common practice where I'm from. But it's so we can remember their lives as well, and we can learn from their lives as well. You know, when we talk about death, it's not just the ending, but it's definitely, you know, the next part of that is to learn, to remember, to reuse the wisdom that have got us into really good places. Like when we're talking about this in terms of the crisis, we can be talking about like, you know, I think AI and technology is going to be one of our helpers in this next phase, but then also holding that second part of also recognizing what parts of this death was caused by, you know, ignoring death or quick solutions or, you know, trying to outsource life and being a good person, you know. So it's kind of, yeah, it's also like this kind of like remembering this legacy that we can kind of bring back into the best things of what we do.
And how do you feel that AI and tech are going to help us?
Yeah, so I'm like a really true believer that if we get the good government policy around AI, that we can actually use it to buy back human time and for us to have time to think, to be, to live. You know, if anyone's like an avid reader, there's a David Graeber book called Bullshit Jobs, which talks about all the bullshit jobs that we have in the world that has been created to keep us all busy as we like totally blinded by all of the political and social upheaval that we witness, you know. And where like, you know, AI and tech can play that, it's okay. So AI can, you know, can we use AI to do some really boring data jobs that someone doesn't need to do? But then also, how do we make sure that government policy is not allowing this to be an exploitative practice, but a regenerative practice? You know, and this is where like the policy, sexy policy plays in, or like tech. You know, we know that we've kind of like messed up we've kind of messed up the climate so much so that there would be some technological solutions that we need to install. But how are we not using that to continue messing up? You know, how are we using that to bridge the gap, you know, to kind of address that like, oh, okay, we might need some technological solutions to do some things, but whilst we do that, we're also replenishing our waterways. We're also bringing back our beautiful wildlife and woodlands. We're no longer harming, you know? So it's like that kind of middle ground. I think it's this like recognition that not everything humans have done in this world is bad. We see a lot of, especially in like some of the darker parts of the environmental movement, you've got people going, humans are the disease, etc. And it's like, no, we aren't the disease. You know, we've just fallen out of balance and out of knowing and out of relationship. But how do we come back in and go, oh, okay, we have this like amazing sense of ingenuity and innovation, and we can use this in tandem with what nature already knows. We can learn from nature and use what we have as humans to build the middle ground. So we're taking our responsibilities of being custodians and stewards of the earth, you know? So I do think that there is like this like very fun technological solution. Yes. But then also we can't use that to like try and cover the problems and not do anything about it. And that's what's happening now. And that's why I think tech, especially in the climate space, has got such dirty connotations to it. It's because a lot of the time our politicians are trying to use it to not do anything rather than use it to further benefit the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like you were going to tell us a third policy change that you have advocated.
Oh, yes. Yes. So the third policy change, this is actually a really fun one. So a few weeks ago, I got to teach this policy workshop to I got to collaborate with like the job centre and job seekers and people who are looking for employment. And yeah, at this economic time, it doesn't matter what's on your CV, it's going to be difficult to find a job. But there were this amazing group of young people who are really passionate about using their skills to better the futures and the worlds. And yeah, we did this whole, practical activism. I told them to pick something they're really excited about, etc. And one of them picked a recycling project, which I was like, I'm not like the biggest fan of recycling. I think we've paid enough attention to recycling, but if that's what they're interested in, they should do it. We created a whole policy around how all buildings should recycle in their local area. And then also we looked at how do we enact it? What are the skills that we're going to use? What are the sticks, the reprimands that we want in place? What are the carrots and the gifts that we want in place as well? And then I got an email 2 weeks later of where they'd already turned the building that they were in into a recycled place. And they'd also had looked into talking to other different businesses in local groups and the next door building and the building behind it and the building around the side of it to also do the same. And even though recycling is something that a lot of people don't want to get bogged down by, nor do I, but it's not about the recycling. It's about how someone has found their agency so much so that they have literally just changed their whole environment in just literally 2 weeks. They've changed the environment that they live in every single day. They've changed the workplace that they live in every single day, and it's like, how do we take that sense of urgency? And it starts that agency starts like that, like a seed, and it just grows and grows and grows and grows. Some of the greatest environmental minds that we have experienced, they didn't just start off doing crazy big things. It started off small and it grew. I remember my first moment of really loving the environment. My mum tried to cut down a tree in our front garden and I just refused to leave. And I sat there like a 70s tree hugger. And this was even before I knew about the climate crisis. I was a child and I just knew this was wrong, And then now, every single time I go back to my mum's house, I tap Willow and I feel like she does know me and I know her. And this is I guess that was the first time when I did a lot of work to kind of get back into how I think I got here. That was the first moment that I practiced my agency. And although small, it worked. And it's like you just keep building from that. And then you'll be so surprised of what you can do. My mum's constantly in awe that the girl who was really shy and couldn't do public speaking now does public speaking on a daily basis and talks to people who she would have found very scary only a few years ago. So it's it's something that's definitely nurtured rather than nature in most spaces.
Amazing. And I saw Roger Hallam speak recently. He was in conversation with Zach Goldsmith at the Planet Local Summit. And he was saying, just start your thing. Like Extinction Rebellion was 4 people for ages. And then suddenly it was thousands. And so you never know, but the power of tuning into what it is that you're connected to and what you believe is possible and making it happen is, sometimes it might stay small and it might never turn into that big thing. And that's also okay. And sometimes it might, but it's the showing up for it that's the important part.
Exactly, yeah. And even with XR as an example, so Gail Bradbrook, who's also one of the co-founders, who's, a woman who I look up to really deeply. And she told me about one of her first actions. One, the fact that she'd been doing environmental things her whole life. She actually showed me a newspaper article that she was in when she was in secondary school about the changes she wanted to make to her school. But then she also told me about one of the actions of where she refused to pay the tax at Greg's on a sausage roll in defiance against the government and wanted to get arrested. And obviously that they did not want to arrest her, they just didn't sell it to her. But it was just I find it so funny how especially when you start looking into the history of these social movements, they started with things that didn't work and they were just very persistent. They knew that they were fighting for something so much greater than themselves and they continue to do so. And even historically, whether it's before Rosa Parks started a bus boycott, there had been 4 other people who had tried to start that same boycott. I'm using the same methods. So yeah, it really does take just, a lot of grit, a lot of resilience, a lot of persistence, and a lot of love as well to continue.
Absolutely. It's not super easy to imagine what it's like to be somebody else. I feel like a lot of the community that listen to this podcast will be of a different generation to you. I guess, like, what is it that you want them to know, and what is it that they can do that really takes into account what you need for this regenerative future?
Yeah, I've done a lot of thinking of this question, because this question comes up a lot. And to the young people that I've worked with over, like the really young people, and I mean, like, I'm a young person, but I've got to literally be collaborators with 12-year-olds, 10-year-olds. So I think the real lessons are, it's one, to recognize our agency. Everyone has agency in this world, even if they were just born into it. And a lot of the time, especially with young people, agency is not recognized. And I remember one of the hardest parts and most annoying parts actually of running for election was when people told me I was too young and I should just like go to school or something. And I kind of was like, yes, I might be young, but also like my experience of the world isn't any less valid, so there's this recognition of agency that young people have that I think older generations kind of need to sit with. But then also there is this grief tending as well. Older people and older generations have so much wisdom that we can learn from. And it's about holding us while we grieve and giving us those notions of wisdoms of how to continue going through, which I think is so powerful. One of my greatest, I guess, like holders of all of this is a rabbi called Rabbi Jeffrey. And I met him while I was at Extinction Rebellion. And he's probably around, mid-70s, late 70s. Yeah, now. And he was a rabbi, and he would send me all different sort of readings to kind of keep me going through, even up to last week, where he sent a congratulations because he'd watched one of my talks, and he's always been a supporter of everything I do. And him recognizing my agency, but then also holding me when I felt like I didn't have it, and nurturing that part of me that was grieving, was really revolutionary to me being able to hold my own grief and also hold others now as well. And then also it's like, be collaborators in our actions as well is a big one as well. I think my life and brain, I guess, changed when I started seeing people a lot younger than me. It's not as it wasn't so parental in my understanding. One of my co-workers when I was in Extinction Rebellion Youth she was 12 at the time. Her name was Elsie. And she wasn't someone who I looked after. She was someone who taught me, who I learnt from, and she learnt from me. And at the time I was like 19, so it's very easy to fall into, oh, she's a kid, and oh, let me just put on the colouring and, keep her entertained. But in actuality, It's like, no, she had this amazing mind that really tested me. And, I taught primary school in my first year of university. And when I say young people really make you think about how much socialization you've taken up as well. I remember having to explain fossil fuels, and I'd went through this whole 20-minute presentation. Like the class was 6 to 10 about what fossil fuels are, how do we get them, how we use them, etc. And then they went, Miss, I don't understand. And I was like, what do you mean you don't understand? I've just gone through this for half an hour. Then they went, no, this doesn't make sense. Like, if the earth is going to like put it back into itself, like, why are we going to dig it up and burn it? And I was like, I guess it doesn't make sense, and these are the kind of lessons and ways that we can kind of like be in tune with young people and really learn from them to kind of recognize when we aren't seeing things as clearly as I think we are as adults. And and also like there is so much life in young people, and it gets you fired up to do things as well. So kind of I always see it's like the wisdom and energy is like both of us working in tandem, of how do we understand the wisdom that we need to be able to, be able to write these policies, to be able to talk to politicians, but then also the energy that young people have and bring to the table to keep it going round. And that's, hopefully how we can all work together in the future to make, all of these juicy and delicious, regenerative, wildest dreams.
Absolutely. It's so important to have mentors and teachers and friends that are older, younger, and also that are more than human, so that we keep our perspectives open and we're constantly seeing things differently again and again and again, because it can be easy to get stuck in the humdrum of our own story and our own experience.
Exactly.
What is your call to action that you would like to leave our friends listening with? And there's been many throughout this whole conversation.
Yes, so many. There's one that I usually say, and I think it's the one that people don't like the most, because everyone loves a little tangible action. Like, I'm going to tell them to, go out and vote or write a letter, or, everyone loves that tangibility. But what I'm asking, and what I would like to ask people is to kind of do that inner take and start that inner work of going, what parts of the system do I inhabit? Do I perpetuate that I don't want to anymore? And how do I do things differently on a daily basis? How do I make every single decision I do with love, duty, and care to myself, to everyone, to the planet, to the more than human? Yeah, and that's my call to action for them. It is kind of tangible in a way, because, whether it's just the coffee run that you do in the morning, it's like, how do you do that? Is you go in there, you ask them how their day is, you call them by name and say thank you. You make the world just a bit more magical every single day, right round to the political decisions that we make every single day, where we decide to buy our goods, who we decide to vote for, what jobs we decide to inhabit as well, is another one that I think a lot of people don't like to talk about, because it is very difficult. But and also just how do we show up, especially when times are hard? How do I do that with love and duty and care for everything? That's my call to action for everyone.
Beautiful. We always like to have an inner and an outer one. And so if there is also an organization or a charity or a campaign that you feel is doing really great work, can you also direct us to one of those?
Yes, I think there's so many, to be honest. Like, it's slightly overwhelming. But a large part of what's going on is everywhere needs support. And I think I would like to ask people to be really politically active in this time. I spoke a bit about the power of letter writing in this, but I know it does feel like so feeble in comparison to everything that's happening in the world. But I want everyone to write that letter to your politician and let them know what parts of they're doing that you're not liking. And I know Amnesty International has some really amazing templates for a lot of things that are going on right now that are unjust. So that's a personal fave. There's just so many. There's Extinction Rebellion, who just need foot soldiers, need people on the streets, need people lending their minds and hearts to the movement. There are so many different places. And I think it's very much what are our individual talents that we can lend the movement, and thinking of that and doing that as well. Because I think it's everyone asks oh, how do you get involved in activism? And it's you have to do that inner work to figure out, what do I want to contribute, to figure out where you need to be, and I think everyone needs to be somewhere different all the time, which is quite nice.
Beautiful. And it's become so easy to write letters through platforms like 38 Degrees and Avaz, and the way that there's great technology to make it really simple, and to find the causes and to find the momentum that's already behind the causes that you can join in with. And the MPs have to register all of those emails, and they have to reply to them, and they have to take action through them.
And this is the time of where, when I said AI can buy back human time, it's get your AI chat box to write your template. Like, you get what I mean? Like, and send it out, and don't spend, so long on doing just one letter. Ask the AI, how do I get all the emails? These are the things that we can use to really make ourselves far more effective in this world by using the technology that people have so lovingly crafted and created for us to use.
Amazing. I love it that my activist avatar can be like at work whilst I'm sleeping.
Exactly. And then, they're going to be like, how are we getting so many emails? And, it's like, finally, technology is working in our favor.
Daze, it's such a pleasure to spend this time with you.
Such a pleasure speaking to you.
How would you like our friends listening to connect with you?
Oh, please, on Instagram. I know, I feel like so Gen Z when I'm like, social media only. But yeah, I'm Daze Aghaji on Instagram, and I occasionally pop up there when I feel like it. I found Instagram a bit draining. So very kind of like there. But if I get any DMs or anything, I'm usually quite quick to answer those. So yeah, I'm at a lot of different protests. If you see me in the world, come and say hi. Yeah. I'm quite friendly, I think.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This is really lovely.
Thank you for listening. We hope that you have enjoyed this episode and it has sparked some inspiration and creativity in you. As always, you can find links to everything we mention in this episode, download our book, and discover so much more over on allthatweare.org. We give space to our guests to share their perspective without debating it or fact-checking, as this approach allows for deep, unedited conversations from the heart. We trust your discernment and wisdom to take what is useful and challenge what isn't in your own understanding. We offer spaces for discussion and integration in our membership community, which we would love for you to join. We don't believe in selling you things you don't need through this podcast, and so it's made possible by you, our beautiful community. If you loved this and would like to connect more deeply with us, please join our membership. You choose what you contribute based on our sliding scale, and you become a patron whose support makes this podcast happen, as well as receiving access to a library of many resources and invitations to nourishing events. Please also hit subscribe and leave us a review wherever you listen so others can find us. This podcast is made by an all-female global team. Me, Amisha Gadiali, producer and host, Annegret Afolderbach, who crafts the words that accompany each episode, and Mary Chan, who edits the sound so skillfully. All That We Are celebrates all that we are already and the untapped potential that lives inside us. It invites the full power of the more than human world, nature, the unseen, our ancestors and our future generations. It reminds us that we never exist in silo, through borders, timelines, or polarity, that in each and every moment, all that we are is here.